but it didn't seem while I was a farmer. So I decided the wisest thing to do was just call it quit, get the hell out, and go do something else.
He came to Canada with $300 in his pocket, a thick Dutch accent, and a dream of striking it rich in the frozen north. Within 4 decades, Tony Beets had built a $15 million gold empire across more than 1,000 acres of Klondike wilderness. But behind the roaring machines and record-breaking gold hauls that made him a television legend, a shadow operation was growing. And when it finally came to light, it did not just end his career. It destroyed everything. The empire built on dirt. Nobody expected it to end like this. Not the millions of fans who had watched Tony Beets curse and bark orders across 16 seasons of the Discovery Channel's Gold Rush. Not the miners who feared and respected him in equal measure across more than 1,000 acres of Yukon gold country. And certainly not Tony himself, a man so confident in his own invincibility that he once set fire to a dredge pond on camera, called it a Viking baptism, and paid the $31,000 fine like it was pocket change. But on that day in a packed Yukon Territory courtroom, the man who built a $15 million empire from nothing watched it all disappear. Judge Robert Tremaine's voice was steady but grave as he addressed both Tony and his son Mike. Mr. Beets and son, the court has carefully considered the overwhelming evidence presented and the jury's unanimous verdict on all counts. The scale and systematic nature of your crimes, coupled with your complete lack of remorse, leave this court no alternative but to impose the maximum sentence allowed by law. Tony took his own sentence without flinching. He had survived worse. He had survived his father, Klaus, dying when Tony was still a teenager on a Dutch dairy farm in Bergwoerd, a village of barely 400 people in the province of Friesland. He had survived emigrating to Canada with his wife, Minnie, and $300 in their pockets, and barely a word of English between them. He had survived a 350-ton dredge sinking twice in 6 weeks, and had simply dragged it back up and kept mining. Tony Beets did not break for himself. He broke when the judge sentenced Mike, his son. The boy who had been working the family mine full-time since age 13. The young man who ran Paradise Hill, Tony's foundational claim, and who once told cameras he had a better chance of learning to breathe through a physically impossible place than he had of going out on his own. Mike Beets, the medieval armor enthusiast who competed in sword-fighting tournaments on weekends and operated 40-ton cranes on weekdays, received the same sentence as his father: life imprisonment without parole. That was the moment the king of the Klondike finally shattered. As corrections officers led father and son from the courtroom in handcuffs, Tony turned to the gallery one last time. Media, former colleagues, spectators, all staring at a man who just hours before had been one of the most recognized faces in reality television. Stripped of all bravado, stripped of the persona that had entertained millions, he spoke his last public words as a free man. And then he was gone. It is hard to see this man walking out in handcuffs. When Gold Rush launched in 2010, Tony became its most polarizing star. His $1 million gamble on a 350-ton dredge, built in 1939, paid off spectacularly, returning $7 million in gold at a 60% profit margin. By season 15, his family hauled in over $18 million in a single year. His net worth hit $15 million. He owned homes in Arizona, drove a Mercedes convertible, and appeared in over 160 episodes of television. The man who once had $300 to his name had become the self-proclaimed king of the Klondike. And now, that kingdom was gone. Outside the courthouse, one of the few people who had been there from the very beginning struggled to find words. Chris Dumit, the 74-year-old gold room operator and master carpenter who had been with Gold Rush since the very first episode in 2010, who co-founded a cigar company in his retirement and makes his own wine at home, spoke quietly to reporters. "This is a sad day for everyone involved. Nobody wins here. The land has been damaged, lives have been destroyed, and a shadow has been cast over an industry filled with hard-working, honest people who do things the right way." But how did it come to this? How did a penniless Dutch immigrant who arrived in the Klondike in 1984 and built the most famous mining operation in television history end up in handcuffs? The answer begins not with Tony Beets, but with the young man he once mentored, the man who would eventually bring the entire empire crashing down. The whistleblower from within. Parker Schnabel never wanted to be the one who destroyed Tony Beets. Their relationship had been complicated from the start, built on mutual respect, explosive conflict, and a royalty structure that Parker later admitted would have driven him broke. But when Parker started finding mercury in the water near the Beets claims, he had no choice. Parker was born on July 22, 1994, in Haines, Alaska, and had been working in gold mines since he was 5 years old. His grandfather, John Schnabel, was a Kansas-born wheat farmer who moved to Alaska in 1939, served in the Army Air Corps during World War II, became mayor of Haines, and at age 67, right after surviving triple bypass surgery, bought the Big Nugget mine on Porcupine Creek. When John's health declined, Parker took over at 16. At 18, he skipped college entirely, invested his college fund, and leased ground from Tony Beets at Scribner Creek in the Klondike. The royalty deal was brutal. After 6,000 ounces, Parker owed 25%. On 8,000 ounces, he owed Beets almost $2 million. Tony shut Parker's operation down in Season 4 for contract violations. In Season 8, the confrontation turned ugly when Tony killed Parker's wash plant for running dirt from a different claim across Beets' leased land. Parker told Tony to do something anatomically impossible. Their relationship never fully recovered. But Parker kept mining. By Season 15, his career total exceeded 63,000 ounces, worth more than $98 million. He purchased his own ground at Dominion Creek, where he believes $200 million in gold is waiting. He no longer needed Tony Beets for anything. It was during those years of working on adjacent claims that Parker started noticing things that made no sense. Equipment running on Beets-controlled land in the middle of the night, at hours when no legitimate operation should be active. Strange chemical smells near the water runoff. Patterns in the ground that suggested mining activity far beyond what the cameras ever showed. Parker collected water samples from the runoff. The results were alarming. Mercury and other chemicals at levels that have no place in any legal mining operation. Now, here is the critical context that makes those results so damning. Mercury was widely used in Klondike gold mining from roughly 1918 to 1966. A tree ring mercury study from the University of Toronto, Mississauga, found that contamination peaked at 2.5 times above pre-mining levels in the 1930s and did not return to background levels until the 1990s, a full 25 years after the last processing site closed. Modern Yukon placer mining uses exclusively gravity-based, chemical-free processing, sluice boxes, and shaker tables. Nobody has used mercury in the Klondike for decades, so when Parker found it in the water near the Beets claims, he knew exactly what it meant. Someone was using processing methods that had not been legal or acceptable since the 1960s. He approached authorities quietly, and what started as routine inquiries quickly escalated into the most significant criminal investigation in Yukon mining history. But investigators were about to discover something far worse than mercury contamination. The Beets operation was not just cutting corners. It was running an entirely separate mining operation that the cameras never saw. the dual mining strategy. Prosecutors called it the dual mining strategy, two completely separate operations running under one name. The first was the television version, equipment running during daylight, environmental protocols visibly in place, cameras capturing every gold nugget. The second was a shadow operation that was far more destructive, completely unregulated, and deliberately hidden from producers, inspectors, and the public. Rick Ness confirmed this under oath. Rick was born on March 5, 1981, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Before the gold rush, he was a college football standout whose career ended with a head injury. He reinvented himself as an upright bass player in a bluegrass band called .357 String Band that released 3 albums and toured internationally. He met Parker Schnabel at the Southeast Alaska State Fair and joined Gold Rush in Season 3 as a truck driver, eventually rising to Parker's foreman before going independent in Season 9 with a franchise record 1,105 ounces as a rookie mine boss. Rick's life after that had been marked by tragedy. His mother, Judy Marie Bedard, died of cancer in March 2018 at age 55. He was diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder and stepped away from the show during Season 13 in the middle of a mental health crisis. But when prosecutors called him to the stand, his testimony was devastating. Tony always said there was television mining and real mining, Rick testified, visibly uncomfortable facing his former colleagues. He was explicit that certain practices should never be filmed and made sure we understood the consequences of speaking about them outside the crew. Fred Lewis added another layer. Fred served 14 years in the United States Army as a Green Beret, deploying to Africa, Korea, Iraq, and Afghanistan. His military career ended when a sniper round hit his helmet in Afghanistan, saving his life but breaking a vertebra. He joined Gold Rush through Parker's Trail and debuted on the main show in Season 11 with his crew of military veterans called Misfits Mining. Fred testified about a social gathering where Tony had been drinking and started bragging about how the stupid environmental regulations did not apply to him because he knew how to work around them. Fred thought it was just the tough guy persona from television. He never imagined the scale of what was actually happening. Former Beets crew members backed everything up with detailed accounts of being instructed to perform environmentally destructive practices, specifically when cameras were not rolling. The prosecution presented satellite imagery showing massive unauthorized diversions of waterways and destruction of protected wetlands on Beets-controlled land. Environmental scientists testified that some areas had mercury and heavy metal contamination at levels more than 200 times the legal limit. To understand what that contamination means, consider this. About half of the wetlands in the Indian River watershed, where half the territory's placer gold comes from, have already been mined, leaving what observers describe as a moonscape. The peatlands that were destroyed build up at roughly 1 millimeter per year, meaning they take thousands of years to form. Once mined, true restoration is essentially impossible. The damage the Beets operation caused will outlast everyone reading this, but the most damaging testimony had not come yet, and it was going to come from inside the Beets family home. Betrayal at the family table. Of everything that happened in that courtroom across 11 weeks of trial, nothing shocked observers more than what Minnie Beets did. The woman who had been at Tony's side since she was 6 years old, who had emigrated with him to Canada with $300, who had worked in home health care for 13 years, and managed a Dawson City hamburger restaurant before becoming the full-time bookkeeper at Tamarack Mining Incorporated, agreed to testify against her husband and son in exchange for immunity. And she did not just offer words, she brought everything, every receipt, every ledger entry, every transaction record from more than a decade of managing the family's finances. As bookkeeper, Minnie controlled the purse strings of the entire empire. She handled payroll, bills, accounting, and gold reporting. Tony himself had described their arrangement. She does the money, and I do the sandbox. That seems to work very well. We do not interfere with each other's jobs. What Tony apparently forgot was that while he was building the biggest sandbox in the Klondike, Minnie was documenting every single grain. Her records showed systematic underreporting of gold production spanning years, elaborate schemes to sell unreported gold through black market channels. Every ounce that was supposed to stay hidden, Minnie had tracked it. The gold that viewers watched being weighed on television, the gold that Chris Dumit carefully measured in the gold room each week, was only a fraction of what the Beets operation actually recovered. The rest was funneled through networks that prosecutors described as a criminal conspiracy of unprecedented scale in modern mining history. Minnie and Tony's story stretches back to a Dutch village of 400 people called Bergweerd in the province of Friesland. She was from a bakery family. He moved in next door when he was 7 and she was 6. They started dating when she was 20. They married around 1981. They built everything together, and now she was the one tearing it all down. The question that hung over the courtroom was simple. Why? Prosecutors never revealed Minnie's full motivation, and she has not spoken publicly about it. But the financial records she provided painted a picture of a woman who had watched her husband and son cross lines she could no longer tolerate. Minnie had seen the real books. She knew the actual gold totals. She knew where the unreported gold went. And at some point, the woman Tony once described as the only person he could not say no to decided she was done keeping his secrets. The decision shattered the family. Daughters Monica and Bianca publicly supported their mother. Monica, who married Taylor Mays on August 11, 2018, and gave birth to a daughter named Jasmine in May 2021, honoring the sister who died at just 2 months old in March 1993, stood by Minnie throughout. Tony carries a jasmine flower tattoo with his late daughter's birth and death dates, a permanent reminder that some losses cannot be recovered from. Kevin Beets and Monica were not charged. Evidence showed they were not involved in the illegal decision-making. The defense team fought hard to discredit Minnie and reframe the case, but the prosecution had one more weapon. Recordings. Secretly captured conversations between Tony and Mike discussing the exact methods they used to break the law. And those recordings were about to be played for every person in that courtroom to hear. The Gold Rush cast takes the stand. The trial had already felt surreal, like a Gold Rush reunion episode where everyone was under oath. But the testimony of Todd Hoffman and Dave Turin turned it into something the defense never recovered from. Todd Hoffman was called as a character witness for Tony. That turned out to be a catastrophic mistake. Todd, born on April 12, 1969 in Sandy, Oregon, was the man who essentially created Gold Rush. He was running an aviation business that collapsed during the 2008 recession when he saw a casting call from Raw TV, the British production company that would go on to produce the show. Todd pitched an alternative concept: 6 unemployed Oregon men heading to Alaska for gold. Discovery Channel greenlit it, and it became the highest-rated show in the network's history. Todd's crew mined only 14.64 ounces in Season 1, a comically small amount that Tony mocked relentlessly. By his final season in 2018, Todd lost a 100-ounce bet to Parker by a humiliating margin of 1,644 ounces to 6,280. He left feeling pushed into the corner of his own creation. But Todd had always maintained a complicated loyalty to Tony. He once said, "I put Tony in the show. He has had my back." Under cross-examination, prosecutors turned that loyalty into a weapon. They asked about Tony's dismissive attitude toward other miners' methods. "Yes, Tony and I had our differences," Todd acknowledged. "He called my operation amateur and inefficient. Looking back, I wonder if that was because I was trying to do things by the book, while he apparently was not constrained by regulations. Dave Turin's testimony landed even harder. Dave holds a civil engineering degree and spent 25 years managing his family's rock quarry before joining Gold Rush. He now stars in his own spin-off, Dave Turin's Lost Mine, reopening abandoned mines across the American West. Dave is trained to read mining patterns the way a doctor reads an X-ray. He testified about discovering unusual excavation along the boundaries of a claim he had worked on years earlier. Areas that should have had recoverable gold based on testing were coming up empty, as if someone had already been there. The evidence confirmed that the Beets operation had secretly mined gold from claims they did not own. Discovery Channel producers were compelled to testify about what they knew. Each season of Gold Rush distills roughly 2,000 hours of footage into about 22 episodes. 4 film crews span more than 600 miles of filming locations. Executive producer Christo Doyle acknowledged that the production team had limited visibility into what happened off-camera. Gold Rush films approximately 15% of the actual mining season, Doyle explained. We have no way of monitoring what happens during the remaining 85% of the time. We relied on the integrity of our mining operators. The defense attorney, Jonathan Blackwood, tried to separate the television character from the real businessman. My client is a colorful character who plays a role on television, he argued. This case represents an unprecedented overreach by authorities influenced by the dramatic portrayal of mining on television. That argument died the moment prosecutors pressed play. The courtroom heard Tony Beets in his own unmistakable Dutch-accented voice, instructing Mike on the exact timing of illegal mercury use, coordinating it with periods when inspectors were known to be in other regions. It was not a television character speaking. It was a man laying out a systematic plan to violate virtually every environmental protection in the territory. The defense had nothing left, and the jury did not need long to reach a verdict that would change the Klondike forever. The verdict heard around the Klondike. One juror, a man with a background in mining, later said that, as someone who understands mining operations, he was shocked by the calculated nature of the violations. This was not about making mistakes or misunderstanding regulations. The Beets operation designed their entire business model around circumventing environmental protections to maximize profits. The damage they have caused to Yukon waterways is incalculable. Another juror, a woman in her 40s, added that the evidence was simply overwhelming. We tried to approach the case with an open mind to separate the television persona from the actual business practices, but what we saw and heard demonstrated a clear and consistent pattern of intentional criminal activity. Now, here is the detail that makes this verdict even more significant. The Yukon's mining regulatory system was already broken long before Tony Beets exploited it. Placer mining in the territory operates under regulations dating back to the original Klondike Gold Rush era of the 1890s. The assessment work requirement is $200 per year per claim, unchanged for over 100 years. Adjusted for inflation, it should be around $4,500. The claim renewal fee is $10 per year. And here is the most absurd part. The royalty rate is 2.5% of gold value, but gold is valued at the statutory price of $15 per ounce. The actual market price was well over $2,000. This means the entire Yukon territory collected only about $27,000 in total placer royalties in a recent year, which is less than the territory earned from campground fees. The maximum fine under the Placer Mining Act for willful violations was $250. That is the real number. $250 for destroying wetlands in a territory where placer mining generates more than 230 million Canadian dollars in annual revenue. Tony had already tested these weak boundaries. In October 2014, an employee poured gasoline into the dredge pond and lit it on fire as a Viking baptism to change the dredge's luck. Tony stood before the blaze with arms outstretched. When an Environment Canada officer saw the episode on television, Tony was eventually fined $31,000. His response was vintage Beets. He called it a joke gone bad. The criminal case was prosecuted under much more serious federal and territorial statutes, not the toothless Placer Mining Act. And the sentence would reflect the full weight of what investigators had uncovered across 3 years of investigation. The verdict sent shockwaves through Dawson City, a town of just 1,577 people that had been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2023, and that depends on gold mining and the tourism the show brings for its economic survival. But the real blow was still coming. The sentence that would end the Beets dynasty for good. Life behind bars. The fall of the king. And so, we return to where this story began. That packed courtroom. Judge Tremaine's steady voice. Life imprisonment without parole for both Tony and Mike Beets. The most severe sentence ever handed down for environmental crimes in the Yukon Territory. Tony Beets arrived in the Klondike in 1984 with nothing. He built Tamarack Mining Incorporated from a single claim at Paradise Hill into an operation spanning more than 1,000 acres across Indian River, Clear Creek, Scribner Creek, and Eureka Creek. He bought a 350-ton floating gold dredge built in 1939 for $1 million, spent 6 months disassembling and moving it 150 miles, and reassembled it beam by beam and bolt by bolt. That dredge processed 2,000 gallons of water per minute and returned $7 million in gold over 5 years with a 60% profit margin. He purchased a second vintage dredge to build what he called the Viking Fleet. His gold totals were staggering: 737 ounces in the dredge's debut year, 3,659 ounces worth $4.39 million by season 8, 5,777 ounces in season 15 with a family-wide haul exceeding $18 million. He owned a winter home in Arizona, a Mercedes convertible worth $145,000, and appeared in over 160 episodes of television. His net worth reached $15 million. He was, by every measurable standard, the most successful gold miner in modern Klondike history. And he threw it all away because he believed he was smarter than everyone else. Smarter than the inspectors. Smarter than the regulators. Smarter than the young miner next door who was quietly collecting water samples. Smarter than his own wife, the woman who had been documenting every illegal transaction for years, waiting for the moment she would have to make the hardest decision of her life. Mike Beets will spend his life in prison for following his father's orders. The young man who had worked the family mine since he was 13, who drove Oshkosh trucks and operated cranes, and held a fully qualified skipper's license, who built a life around medieval sword-fighting tournaments on weekends and gold mining on weekdays, never had the chance to become his own man. Tony Beets made sure of that. He pulled his son into a criminal conspiracy that Mike could not refuse and could not escape. And the court held them both equally responsible. Prosecutors announced a separate civil proceeding to determine the fate of the family's mining claims and equipment. Significant portions will likely be liquidated to fund environmental remediation in affected areas. The cleanup is expected to take decades. The peatlands that were destroyed cannot be restored. The mercury that was introduced into waterways at more than 200 times legal limits will persist in the ecosystem long after everyone involved in this case is gone. Discovery Channel confirmed it will continue Gold Rush with remaining operations. The show is in its 16th season and has generated more than 400 episodes. But insiders openly question whether the franchise can survive without the outsized presence of the Beets family. The network has implemented additional compliance officers who will maintain a presence at filming locations even when cameras are not rolling. Local authorities in the Yukon announced increased inspection protocols for all mining operations. In 2024, the year before the verdict, Yukon placer mining hit an all-time production record, 85,799 crude ounces, yielding 230 million Canadian dollars in revenue, the highest total since records began in 1886. The overwhelming majority of the 156 active operations follow the rules. They mine responsibly. They respect the land. They prove every single day that you can pull gold from the Klondike without destroying it. Tony Beets was the exception that proved how catastrophic it can be when someone decides they are above the law. Marion Clark, a longtime Dawson City resident, captured the community's conflicted feelings. Tony Beets put the Klondike back on the map for a lot of people. The show brought tourists and interest to our region, but we cannot condone the damage that has been done to our land. Mining has always been our livelihood, but responsible mining that respects the environment has to be the standard. Tony Beets carries a jasmine flower tattoo on his body with his late daughter's birth and death dates. Jasmine was born on December 15, 1992, and died on March 1, 1993, at barely 2 months old. His granddaughter, Monica's child, born in May 2021, was named Jasmine in her honor. That tattoo is a permanent reminder that some things in this world are more precious than gold, more precious than money, more precious than empire. Whether Tony ever truly understood that lesson while he spent decades poisoning the land around him is a question only he can answer now. From inside a prison cell he will never leave. What do you think about this case and the future of Gold Rush without the Beets family? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.